This is my 1999 Honda Civic. It is the wildest Civic of my dreams. I have been asked more times than I care to admit, when are you going to do an overview video on this thing? Well, today's the day. I'm going to take you through absolutely everything on this car, all of the cool parts on it, and the history of this car and how it came to be this wild machine. So stick around, you're going to learn everything about it. First things first, I want to talk about how this car came to be in the first place. It was about 3 years ago. I sat down with one of my very best friends in the whole world, Jake, and talked to him about building another off-road Civic. See, he had already built one of these. Front-wheel drive, lifted 3 inches, 29-inch tall tires, and that car went everywhere. I was so impressed with what that car could do off-road that I was like, what if we just took everything on a Honda Civic to the absolute extremes? Fast forward 3 years later, that's exactly what we did. And by we, I mean Jake, because I'm not gonna lie, he did probably 95% of everything you see on this car at his garage. I was just there for emotional support and having a good time, and it was a wild, wild build. So we started off with a chassis. It was a 1996 Honda Civic. This was back in 2021. We bought that car for like 500 bucks, drove all the way out to the middle of nowhere to get it, went back and started ripping into it. And that same night, we picked up a 1999 Honda CRV. That CRV had the all-wheel drive system that we needed, and it had the suspension that we were going to need to put on this thing as well. So we had the game plan, we had the cars, we tore them apart, got everything off of the CRV that we needed, pulled it out, pulled the car in, started swapping over parts, and we basically had a car rolling and ready to go within a matter of just a few weeks. But then we started running into some issues. Basically, I wanted to start with an automatic all-wheel drive build, and that's what we had. We had an automatic CRV driveline that we put into the thing, and it just never ended up working. It was always in limp mode, it always struggled, and we were just like, what is going on? So we asked around for some help. It went to a couple different shops to no avail. Nobody could get it to run. We tried getting a custom harness for it. It never would work. So about 2 years into the project, we realized, well, I realized I was being stubborn and I didn't want to have a manual transmission car for going off-road. I was no good at driving manuals, so I did what any good boy would do and learned how to drive a 3-pedal car. Fast forward to about a year ago, we then realized we needed a newer style body of Civic to work with the newer style of CRV components because it doesn't like to talk to one another. It's OBD2A and OBD2B, two totally different systems. So ended up driving again to the middle of nowhere to go and pick up a 1999 chassis, the one you see behind me, and then swap over everything from the old car that we had worked on for about 2 years onto this new chassis. And then we finally had our running car with a lift, with the big tires and wheels. It was just awesome to see that thing rolling around. And then we realized it was about a month or so until my favorite show, Riverside. So I was like, let's put a deadline on this thing and let's rush getting this car put together. And we got wrap for it, the wheels and tires put on it, the interior looking somewhat decent, and just got it to where it was functional and we could drive the thing. And here it is, unveiled at Riverside, Chattanooga earlier this year. This car is an absolute ripper. It sounds incredible. And that is the history on the car. So now that you know the history of the car, let's talk about the overall design. We're gonna start with the front end here and the outside of the car first. You may remember where I said we had to get a newer style Civic, a 99 to 2000. That is the facelift variant of this generation of Honda Civic, the EK6 generation. But this is a 96 to 98 front end. I am stubborn. I didn't want a 99 to 2000 front end. I'd already bought headlights and couple other things, these bumpers and all this for a 96 to 98 like we started with 3 years ago. And so when it came time to put everything on, I was like, before we send the old donor car to the scrapyard, let's pull everything off, the hood, the fenders, bumpers, headlights, taillights, trunk from the old car and de-facelift this car. And this is the final result. So it's a 96 to 98 look on a 1999. Pretty sure I'm one of just very few people out there that ever decided to do that. Was it worth it? I don't know. Of course, at the very front here is this huge bash bar. This actually comes from Rugged Ridge, and it is made for a Jeep Wrangler. So this whole front end here has been custom modified to work with this bar. My friend Sean at Sweaty Speed Shop actually helped us out with a lot of the fabrication on this build, and this was one of the things he came and helped us with, basically putting this on to the original bumper area where the steel bumper mounts. So everything's been welded tight. It is absolutely solid. You can move this car up and down from this bar. It's not going anywhere. And I've yet to put a winch on it. I might do that one day. Okay, so next, let's talk about the wheel and tire setup on this thing. As you can see, it is super beefy. It sticks out like 4 inches from the fenders. It actually sticks out a little bit more than I had anticipated, but nevertheless, we are looking at a 15x8 wheel right here. It's a steel wheel. I'm pretty sure I got it from Jegs. 2 inches of backspace. That's why it sticks out so far right here. And on that, we're going to talk about our first sponsor of the build here, Two Brothers Tire and Automotive. They hooked us up with a set of these gorgeous Nexen 235/75 R15s. Remember, I was talking about my friend Jake's Civic also has the same size tire on his as well. But instead of it being a 3-inch lift, we have a 6-inch lift on this. This is how we have all of this gap up in here. That is because we've got a custom HRG Off-Road lift. We actually sent the old car off to HRG so that he could custom make us a brand new suspension for this thing. It's got extended spindles, adapters for the back, which I'll show you here in a few minutes, but everything on this suspension-wise is completely one-off. And lastly under here, we actually had our upper arm sponsored by TruHart on this, so we were actually able to get it in line pretty well. But next, I want to talk about the color on the car. Now, a lot of people think this is paint, but it's not. This is a wrap from our other sponsor, Inozetek. Inozetek makes some of the best high quality wraps. They're super thick, very resistant to like sun fading. There's actually some parts on this car that have sun fading to them already after sitting outside for 6 months. The wrap is not one of them. It's sitting out here in the elements. It looks absolutely gorgeous. I have not washed this car once. I mean, gray does hide a lot of sins and imperfections, but honestly, I'm very happy with how this turned out. This wrap, being this beautiful gray color, just looks exactly like the rendering I had all those years ago on this car. It is exactly what I wanted. Shout out to Greg over at Inozetek for helping us out with this, and all the guys over at Inozetek. You guys have been awesome. And of course, finishing us off here on the exterior, we've got my calling card whenever it comes to EK builds, it seems, a set of clear taillight lenses. These are no ordinary clear taillight lenses, to me at least anyway, because these actually came off of my very first car I ever built. It's also kind of why I wanted to have the 96 to 98 front and rear end on this thing, because when we first started this build, I knew I wanted to have certain aesthetics in line, and one of them was having a set of clear taillights. So I took to Marketplace, and it took me days and days and days of looking, and finally I noticed about 40 miles from where I lived these exact taillights. And I started looking closer to them, and I noticed that they were wired up a certain way, and I was like, that's strange. I remember wiring mine up the exact same with the inline resistors. Like, I think we used those exact ones. So I ended up messaging the guy and getting a little bit more information from him, and it turns out he ended up buying these off of the guy that bought my old car off of me. The guy wrecked the car. These were parted out with it. And lo and behold, years later, he just happened to decide he wanted to sell them. And I was the guy that bought them. So these are the exact lenses from my very first build ever. And they live on here on this car. Now I want to take you guys down low here so you can see the rear end setup. Our very first sponsor we ever had on this build was S1 Built. If you guys are unfamiliar, S1 makes the rear end components for converting your Honda Civic to all-wheel drive. This actually utilizes the same diff that you get in a CRV with all of their components. They supplied the trailing arms, the billet lower control arms, the adapter mount, and everything to make this an all-wheel drive ripper. Now, normally their kits are used in like high horsepower applications for drag racing. Not so much this, definitely not what they normally are used for, but it works phenomenally. Everything is hooked up and it works as it should. It's also worth mentioning that while the car was over at HRG Off-Road, one of the pieces that they built was an adapter piece for the S1 Built components to work with the lift kit from HRG. So super cool that they were able to do that, and we were able to use basically everything off of the S1 kit as well. And this right here is one of my favorite views of this car. It's the rear end shot where you can see underneath it, look at all the all-wheel drive components, and see just how wide the track width is on this and how tall it is. This offers like 8 or 9 inches more ground clearance thanks to the lift kit and the additional tire size than the factory car. So it's basically doubled its original ride height, which is pretty impressive. Now, I do want to mention just a couple things here. Number one, this is a one-off lift kit from HRG Off-Road. There's so many custom components to this that if you wanted to replicate it, unfortunately, not really going to be able to help you out there. So this is a one-off car for the time being, unless somebody wants to try and fabricate their own pieces to make everything work. Number two, because it is all completely custom on this car, we actually had to have the drive shaft shortened by, I think it was right at 2¼ inches or so. And the guys over at Hudlow Axle were able to get that taken care of for us. They cut it up and made it custom, and it doesn't vibrate even at speed. It's absolutely wonderful. And then lastly, I'm not going to get into like super specific numbers or anything, but the amount that it would take you to build this car, I would highly recommend that if you're interested in something like this, you could just buy a CRV and stick a lift kit on it from HRG and call it a day. But honestly, this was a passion project. I absolutely love it. It is a one of a kind, so it fits my personality to a T. I love it, wouldn't trade it for anything. Okay, so now let's move on to the interior. Right here we have a Bridge Moto steering wheel. My buddies over at Bridge Moto are the best. Shout out to Alan and Rachel over there at Bridge Moto. This wheel was right up my alley whenever I was like, I want to have something custom, and this thing definitely fits the bill. It looks super nice. Not a sponsor, but they are the homies. And then over here in the passenger footwell, we've got a fully customized P28 ECU from my boy Jason Waters over at Jason Waters Tuning. He has helped us out so much. He custom made us this P28, so it's got 2-step and a lot of other cool stuff, and he is the best whenever it comes to tuning Hondas. So it's awesome to say I've got the best ECU on my car. And then right here, we have the absolute best shifter in the game, courtesy of our sponsors over at Hybrid Racing. This is actually made for, I believe, an Acura TSX with an adapter plate and some other cables for it. And it all works together with this manual all-wheel drive transmission for B Series. It's so smooth. It's perfect. It's got really great engagement. It is just an absolutely killer setup. Definitely check them out if you've got a custom Honda. And since we're in here already, yeah, it is super dirty and cluttered with stuff, but These are the seats that I decided we were going to go with, and they are out of an FG2 Civic Si. I'm actually working on another Civic project at the moment that is running these same seats with factory rails up front, and we're even going to do a back seat conversion on this and on the other car that I'm building, so be sure to stay tuned for that as well. Now, let's go under the hood here. And once again, just wanting to point out that this has already started to oxidize from the sun. These are already starting to chip and peel at the clear coat. These are brand new headlights, and yet the wrap is holding up phenomenally. So just wanted to point that out again. Shout out to Inozetek for making some of the best wrap in the business. Here is the engine bay. This is again a B20 from a Honda CRV. Again, all-wheel drive, manual transmission made it up to it. Let's take a closer look. So again, here we are. Here's that lovely B20. We pulled this straight out of the car. I didn't even want to clean it off or anything like that. This is a raw car, you know, it's meant to go off-road. It's a woods toy. We ended up running a different radiator here, and then I've also got all of the components to put air conditioning into this thing, which is actually one of the things that we'll be working on in the future to improve this. We also have another sponsor under the hood in the form of Hasport. These guys are the absolute best in the game whenever it comes to custom mounts for Hondas and swapping over just about any Honda motor into any Honda car. So if you wanted to case swap, just use their mounts, it goes right in. Brian and his team have been in the game for probably as long as I've been alive. So shout out to them, shout out to Brian for taking all of my questions and phone calls and helping us out with this thing, because it would not be here sitting the way it is without your help and the mount. So thanks, Brian, appreciate it. You can also see the HRG logo found here at the top of the strut towers. That is, of course, the lift for the front. There's actually no lift pucks in the rear. That is completely all spring. It's all CRV suspension all the way throughout, and this is the only spacer that we have on it. We've also got those extended spindles up front, which are not being made as well. So this is the one-off suspension setup all the way through. You've seen it from the underside, you've now seen it from the top side. That is all of the suspension. And before I forget, this thing also has a super trick clutch in it from the guys over at Advanced Clutch Technology. I met those guys up at PRI last year, and they were some of the coolest folks, and I immediately knew as soon as I started talking with them that I wanted to work with them in some way. And they've been nothing but nice, nothing but helpful, and were able to get us a clutch that is one of the smoothest riding clutches I've ever had in a car. Shout out to them. They've got clutches that range all the way from close to factory, which is what this one is, all the way up to like the racing clutches. If this thing were making like 1,000 horsepower, they've got the clutches. So go check them out if you're needing a clutch. And as I close this up, I'd like to thank a couple of cash sponsors, because not everything on this car was sponsored, and I did have to actually spend some money at some point. And those cash sponsors are Prentice Performance Imports, my friend John Prentice down in Florida. He helped us out buying a couple of things for this car, and wouldn't be here without him. And it's just awesome to see his support on this build, and it's been years, so shout out to him. And then the Saudi Daisy Speed Shop. I actually used to work for those guys doing media for them basically full time, and they stepped up as soon as they heard what we were building this wild machine and wanted in on it, and helped us buy a couple things. And so again, shout out to them, Lucas and all the guys over there at the shop. Thank you very much. This thing is it's pretty rad. And it's kind of hard to believe, but when we started this project, there was actually a physical magazine version of S3 magazine still around. Without S3 magazine in the first place, this build would have just remained an absolute theory. And lastly, I would just like to take a moment one more time to give a very, very special shout out to my friend Jake, one of my very best friends in the whole world, who took on this project and sacrificed a lot of his time, his efforts, to work on this car for me, his friend. And it's such a massive undertaking, and is one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of. he did, like I said, 95% of what you see here. I like fit the fenders and the hood and a couple other aesthetic things, but when it came to functionality and doing the swaps, he was the forefront of knowledge for this whole project. And just, man, it's hard to put into words, but thank you so much for all of your time and making this a reality and something that I get to hoon around in on occasion and have a lot of fun in. I can't wait to take this on a Gambler 500 with you and rock these Civics side by side and do all sorts of wild and wacky stuff out on the trails. So once again, Jake, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you so much for this wild gift. And again, thank you to Sean over at Schwetty's Speed Shop for helping us out with the final bits of fabrication to make sure that we got this thing to Riverside. Wouldn't have been possible without him. The car is actually sitting here on his property with all of his other wild builds. So if you like this, you will also like both Jake's cars and Sean's cars. Be sure to check them out. I'm going to leave links down in the description. So I suppose that will wrap us up on this one. The most overdue video I have ever had. Sorry it took this long. Been a lot of wild stuff going on. We'll call this the 100,000 subscribers special. So ta-da, here it is. And we'll be doing some more stuff on this periodically as time goes on. So be sure to stick around, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Because yeah, we like doing fun car stuff around here. Take care. We'll see you in the next one. Later.